Good evening and welcome to another Hangouts on Air. This is our Christmas edition. It's December. I'm joined tonight by Hugh Mantle, who's got a bit of a sore throat. Hugh, just tell us a little bit about what you do and what's happening in your world at the moment.
I'm doing at the moment a lot of work with Tesco, a lot of cold chain auditing work, which normally involves spending a lot of time in their stores, mostly at night, where we're looking at their practices and asking questions. On top of that, I'm running a fair few of their internal courses as well, which they call Gold, but is actually it is in between sort of level 2 and 3, but the questions are actually written. So there's 3 questions. One part's multiple choice, but they actually have 2 long questions to complete. So in actual fact, in some ways, it's actually in advance of level 3. But and these are normally departmental managers, possibly deputy managers of stores, etc., doing that. So a lot of that and the cold chain auditing, well, and the courses take me all over, to be honest. And I'm gonna have to go to Ireland and places like that again to actually do this. But it's all good stuff. It's good stuff.
Busy man. The one thing that people might not know is that although you got level 4 training, level 4 training is only available to manufacturing and catering. I've never really quite worked out why people think there's no need for a higher level and a level 3 for retail, because there obviously is. Most of them tend to go for a manufacturing one. People like Sainsbury's and Morrison's and all that, and they normally do level 4. Anyway, we'll get on with the presentation, which is partly a review of what we've been doing over the last 12 months on these webinars, and partly to do with it's coming to Christmas and what sort of things that chefs, caterers, and even people at home need to look out for. So here we go. December is usually the time we sit back and reflect what's happened over the previous 12 months. We've had plenty of changes to take on board, starting with the Food Information Regulations, which came into force on the 13th of December last year. Also, a new food crime unit headed up by Andy Morling, head of food crime, and he's been in post since March 2015. More recently, we had an updated version of Safer Food, Better Business, which was covered in detail in last month's webinar by David Newsom. All in all, it's been a very interesting year. The Food Information Regs came at one of the busiest times of year for most caterers, and because there had been a dearth of information reaching chefs and caterers on the shop floor, people were panicking. Even though people knew about the regs, they simply didn't understand what it was all about. Fortunately, I had developed a free allergen pack, which I gave out to over 200 caterers. Did you know, for example, that some people are allergic to water? And for some people, coming into contact with lemons can be fatal. The allergen matrix and standard recipes were well received by the people who asked for a free copy. Speaking with an environmental health colleague the other day, she said that people have now either managed to get it right or have done nothing at all. We've been continuing with our series of webinars. In January, we took a look at cleaning and disinfection. In particular, we looked at BS-EN 1276 and BS-EN 13697, required when disinfecting equipment and food contact surfaces. If you Google FSA and disinfection, you'll find the website, which lists all the approved disinfectants and their contact times. In the last month, surprisingly enough, Dettol has now been taken off the approved list. In February, Jude Hutchinson took a back-to-basics look at hand hygiene in the industry. In March, David Newsom took an update on Campylobacter. In April, he also undertook a review of the food information regulations and what impact it had had on the food industry. What continues to amaze me is the amount of product recalls from manufacturers on allergens that aren't listed on their labels. If they can't get this right, how much harder is it for chefs and caterers to do the same? May. This was our first birthday, so Patrick Mackey and myself had a session on reviewing everything we'd covered in the previous 12 months. Gail Filburn eventually managed to join us, but she'd been stuck in traffic. In June, we took a sideways step and looked at Safer Workplace, Better Business. This is the health and safety equivalent of Safer Food, Better Business. It's very comprehensive and very useful for small businesses to help them manage their health and safety in a formalised way. David Newsom did an update of listeria in July. I still remember how he mentioned that of all foodborne illnesses that result in hospitalisation, listeria infections result in the most deaths. In August and September, we had a long summer break and took our trusty Works 2CV van over to the World Meeting in Poland, eventually driving all the way to Gdansk. Not bad for a 30-year-old car. This picture was actually taken in northern Spain some 2 years earlier, where we had driven to a World Meeting in Alcanés in Spain. We drove back home up through Andorra in the Pyrenees and all the way up through France. Patrick Mackey did an interesting presentation on raw burgers and the role of the Food Standards Agency in October. Last month we had a technical first, showing David Newsom broadcasting from his hotel room down in London. We weren't sure if it would work out or not, but eventually everything turned out fine. The subject of the session was a newly relaunched and updated Safer Food, Better Business Pack. This was no mean feat, as it had only been launched the previous day. Well done, David. Now on to some more timely seasonal advice for December. Christmas time for most chefs and caterers is a very busy time of year, and there is an increased chance of things going wrong. Here's some tips. Don't prepare food too far in advance. This can lead to an increase in the risk of food poisoning. Thoroughly thaw all your meat and poultry. If you're using larger joints than normal, make sure you adjust your cooking times accordingly. Remember to wash and disinfect all food and hand contact surfaces to prevent cross-contamination. Make sure all cooked food reaches a core temperature of plus 75 degrees Celsius. Serve food hot and rapidly chill and refrigerate any leftovers. Put food in a cool, clean container and break up into small pieces to facilitate chilling. Use any leftovers within 48 hours, and if you're reheating to do this, do it at plus 75 degrees Celsius and serve it immediately. And don't reheat anything more than once. The other thing to remember is not to stuff any poultry, as this will increase the cooking time and cooling time. If your turkey is too big, then separate the legs to shorten the cooking time. The Food Standards Agency is again stressing to people not to wash their raw chicken, as this can spread the risk of food poisoning. Fortunately, Campylobacter is fairly easily killed by thorough cooking, and if you're careful with hand washing and cleaning and disinfection, you will lower the risk even further. It's thought that as few as 500 bacteria can make someone ill. Marks and Spencer last year launched chicken in a roasting bag, so people don't even have to look to take the bird out of the bag to prepare it. People should still take care with handling these and not putting the raw item onto cooked food surfaces. So all that leaves me to do is to wish everyone a safe and happy Christmas.
Well, there we go. That's the last year on Christmas, all in about 7 minutes. So that's some comments here.
Well, various ones really. The health and safety version of Safer Food, Better Business. Just as an aside, I think that's an amazing document. can't understand why it's not being taken up. Because isn't that Devon or Cornwall that did that?
Yeah, it's Devon and Cornwall, their health and safety group. I got permission to use it and distribute it, and we did the presentation on it as soon as I found out.
Yeah.
But I've been talking to local environmental health officers, and they aren't as enamoured with it as I am.
Really?
I think the trouble is that local environmental health officers these days are not allowed to go to Category C places, so they don't see, like I see, the lack of health and safety provision. If I go into most restaurants I see, and you mention health and safety, you'd be lucky to find a risk assessment. And if people were allowed to push this more, then I think that the world will be a safer place.
Yeah.
And caterers, for example, are all already familiar with that format. And it's so comprehensive, it covers everything. It even covers radon, for God's sake, which in Harrogate is a particular problem because we have an issue with radon, which most places don't recognise. And radon is a radioactive gas. So you need to do a risk assessment on it, really, if you've got a business. But as I say, there is a bit of a reluctance from environmental health professionals to push it. I can understand why, because it's not a replacement for a full-blown risk assessment for a large organisation or a risky organisation. And another thing is it doesn't prioritise between someone injuring themselves seriously or someone getting a paper cut from a photocopier. They don't sort of have that way of prioritising it. But it's certainly a damn good checklist to get things rolling where an organisation...
Well, isn't that the point? Because at the moment, there's nothing. And look what, in a lot of cases, safer food, better business, has been ignored, but it has certainly gathered momentum over a period of time. And people are buying into it, I think, now. And if we could get them to do similar sorts of things, get them started in the health and safety sort of mindset, because that's what you need, isn't it? That's all it is. It's a cultural thing. It's a mindset thing.
It's a bit like food safety culture. We need to get people into a health and safety culture where it's not someone stood there in a clipboard, which was the old HSG 65 pop bar model, to more the plan, do, check, act HSG 65 that came out about 3 years ago. So if we can get health and safety embedded into these low risk businesses, for example, and places of work, then I think that's going to go hand in hand with food safety issues. Now, with food safety, people are expecting to be inspected between every 6 months and every 3 years. A normal high risk operation. And in Wales, because of mandatory display of the food hygiene rating, you've actually got higher standards now of food safety generally that's measurable in Wales. So if you have a similar thing on health and safety where people were allowed to inspect low risk premises again, instead of them, if I rewind and just say that the only time anything gets noticed on a low risk establishment and the only time they get inspected is if there's been an incident.
What, a RIDDOR situation or something such as that?
Yes, something like a RIDDOR or an accident or a death. And then they get pulled in. Then they suddenly find out that the organisation didn't understand what they had to do. And ignorance is no excuse where the law's concerned. No. But because they don't get inspected, and because there's no sort of a equivalent of a rating system for health and safety, these people just simply don't know that they're unconsciously incompetent. So they don't know what they don't know. And not a good place to be, for a business, particularly when people's lives are potentially at risk. I'll give you an example. I've been on one of my Facebook groups the other week, last week, I think, and one of the chefs there was asking what he should do because he kept getting an electrical belt from the stainless steel table. and he'd mentioned it to his management, and the table was live intermittently, and him and his staff were getting electric shocks off a table because either the equipment wasn't faulty or
it hadn't been earth strapped.
It wasn't earthed.
Yeah.
And because what happens with that is people undo the earth strap to pull a table out to clean behind it, and then the kitchen porter or whoever doesn't pull back the earthing strap, so the table itself will transmit that electric shock from faulty equipment to you. And the thing was, it wasn't the fact that management hadn't got through. It wasn't the fact that the chef had to ask. I mean, there was just a total lack of awareness of people's roles and responsibilities. I mean, we sort of said, look, as a head chef, you've got responsibility to safeguard your staff, so you must raise it with management, offer to get an electrician in, and in the meantime, don't work there.
Yeah.
Just go out. I think that, there's this issue about, well, if I do that, I'll lose my job. But I'd rather lose a job than lose someone's life. Anyway, that's my rant over for health and safety.
No, that's fine. The other thing that was interesting, I listened to a really interesting piece on the radio about allergies, and it was a lady who her son had to date, he's 11, and he had 143 different allergies, and she went through lots of things that we know, but it was just interesting hearing them again. So it was about things like how an allergy occurs in the first instance. There was a beekeeper. She talked about a guy who'd been a beekeeper for 30 odd years. He was stung 19 times and had no effect. All of a sudden, the 20th time, anaphylactic shock, and he then had to stop actually being a beekeeper. So it's about the build-up within the body, and I think we know these things. And she was talking about her son, and we talk about trace, how much is actually going to affect someone. When you get on a plane, if someone's got a peanut allergy, they normally give out the piece of paper and say there'll be no peanuts actually given out on this flight. But on the flight that she was on, they hadn't done this, and the guy at the front of the plane, they were going to the Canaries, he had a pack of peanuts. 2 hours later, at the back of the plane, the lad had to use his EpiPen because it went up into the ventilation and came back down, and that small amount set him off. So I think that a lot of this is understanding the degree, because if you're not an allergic type of person, you don't understand this and how susceptible some people can actually be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Hugh, is that you're right, the small amount. What happens with most allergies is, people can be intolerant to stuff, which can then turn to an allergy.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is that people become sensitized to a subject. So, for example, I've been gardening for years, and at the back of my house, I've got 3 lots.
Yeah, I remember you showed me. Yeah,
and I've been handling sorrel, French sorrel, for donkey's years. And a couple of years back, my wife asked me to pick some sorrel and put it on the compost heap, because she'd last year or the year before, she'd had a reaction. So I picked this sorrel up, which was in it was in seed at the time, so there was pollen there.
Yeah.
Put it onto the compost heap. I was in my t-shirt with gloves on, and I thought, well, I better wash my hands just in case. I washed my arms, came in. The following day, the whole of my arm, all the way up here, was covered in hives.
Yeah.
So now what I have got to be very careful. I don't know for a fact if I'm allergic to the pollen, sorrel itself, or something in the sorrel. But if I go out now, I daren't eat a mixed salad unless I know for a fact what's in that mixed salad.
Yeah.
And I used to love sorrel, lovely bit of taste. The other thing that people don't realise, and we've covered this when we've covered the allergen and the food information regs, is that people don't realise what is or isn't in food. For example, hidden allergens can be in malt vinegar. You've got gluten in malt vinegar.
Yeah.
Mustard is an allergen in its own right, but English mustard contains gluten because there's an element of flour in there. And there's all these weird and wonderful things that are in our food that we don't know exist, unless you read up about it, like I've had to do. And what really absolutely amazes me, as I said in the presentation, is the number of food manufacturers, such as, Asda today have withdrawn their, I can't remember, it's a cake mix or something mix, and they've withdrawn it today because it contained gluten and it contains something else as well. And you think, hang on, surely someone who's producing for a major retailer like Asda, surely somewhere along the way someone would know that that product contained those items.
But most of the recalls that we see now, the vast majority are to do with allergens, aren't they?
They're nearly all to do with allergens. You think, well, how can they not have a qualified person who's responsible for the ingredients list and responsible for the labeling? There was nothing wrong with the products. The product was fine, but it wasn't on the label, so they had to withdraw it. And when you think of what that cost is, I see maybe 2 or 3 a day product recalls from major manufacturers. And if you think of the cost of that, because a lot of the fresh foods have got to be slung, so that's total food waste. You can't give it away, you can't do anything with it. Some of it can be reworked and repackaged, but that costs money. So if you think about how much money that puts on people's food bill, our food would be downside cheaper if we didn't those all the time.
What just going on the allergens, Tesco now do a gluten-free bread, and the bread actually comes in, it's a frozen product and it's a wrapped product, and it's cooked within the wrap and displayed within the same wrap. And it was interesting because I was asked the question, one of the people on the course was a bakery manager, and they'd actually had a customer complaint about the fact that the gluten-free bread, even though it was wrapped, was being displayed alongside normal bread.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, that's a very valid point, isn't it?
Well, yes, because if you think that the limits for gluten-free is 20 parts per million, and very low gluten is 100 parts per million, that isn't an awful lot. So if you've got migration onto the outside packaging of that bread, so someone who's opening that package of bread is handling it,
and he's
then
susceptible.
they take the bread out, and then they're putting gluten from the packaging on the inside of bread. So they should be displayed in a separate part of the store.
And apparently now that's what they are. So it's just an interesting one, isn't it? But it hadn't been picked up in the beginning.
Well, if you think about it this way, we've got there's at least one baker that I know who he makes his pies and whatever with gluten-free flour, and then he puts it on display and labels it gluten-free. And this is from a bakehouse. And I have sort of mentioned, look, if you turn around and put something to the effect that it's made with gluten-free, but it may contain, because of migration, etc., and people can make an informed decision. But if people see gluten-free, they automatically think, oh, that's fine, we'll have that.
It's totally safe. That's what they're thinking.
That's what they're thinking when it isn't. We've at least one local outlet, I think it's a fish and chip shop, is having 1 or 2 gluten-free evenings. Now, okay, you can change the oil as much as you like, but how many people can actually guarantee that their fish fryer, when it's empty, can be cleaned out and not have any gluten in it? You're in that sort of industry as well.
They can't, Steve. And essentially, there are shops. I was over in Hull at a new fish and chip restaurant, and they have a continuous gluten-free scenario alongside the normal fish and chip scenario. And I basically said to them, I said, you are aware, blah, blah, And of course they acknowledged it, etc. But they didn't grasp it in terms of, so what are your processes? How are you managing to isolate it? All of these things. And I think that the problem is with this is they're doing it for a market. They're doing it because they're marketing a facility as well as offering a product. And I think that's part of the problem.
I think everyone's jumped on the sort of gluten-free bandwagon, and there is money to be made there. And I have no problem with people doing it as long as they do it correctly.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
But you know, people don't realise how debilitating. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who teaches NLP, and she's a celiac now. She's only recently been diagnosed.
Yeah.
And she says when she's asked people, is it gluten-free, and said yes, she's been hospitalised, for God's sake. That's how bad it can be.
Yeah.
Maybe not as bad as a peanut allergy where people tend to die from it. But you know, if you're in agony and
that's serious. It's still serious, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not good.
Right.
Anyway, we've nearly had our time on here.
I was going to say I'm going to have to go.
Have you any last thoughts about Christmas on that side of things for people?
Yeah, just I think, I mean, you picked up virtually everything. Just for me to re-emphasise, in Scotland, the legal requirement of 82 on reheat. But everything else that you said, you know, I heartily support. And we do have to get over this thing about washing or not washing, poultry, not washing any type of meat at all. And the reason, because culturally, there are certain cultures that actually believe that this is still the right thing, whatever the Food Standards Agency actually say.
Well, we've got situation, particularly in Chinese restaurants and some Asian restaurants, where they don't wash the pots.
Yeah.
What they do, they simply use they sometimes just get some old towels from home and use that to wipe the things out with.
Yeah.
Which is not what we want to see people doing. Now I'm just trying to load. No, that's not working. I might have to read this out to you.
Okay, go on then.
Oh no, it's there. Let's have a look. No, preview isn't working. No, I can't. For some reason on this Mac, it's not working, so I can't even read it out because I can't load the damn thing up. Although I had it on before. Try one last time. See what's on screen share. No, it's not showing it. So David just wanted to leave a message to say wish everyone a Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at putting on something in the new year, which is on the first Tuesday in the new year. I think that's about the 5th, something like that.
Yeah.
And basically, the subject I've chosen is one that's a bit of a hot topic with especially young chefs. Yeah. And that's the topic of undercooked or pink pork. I'm having quite a few run-ins with chefs who say if you cook pork to 75, it ruins it. And you know there are all sorts of risks associated, as you're aware. So I'm going to have a look at some of these in more detail.
Steve, can we include a bit of something on sous vide in that as well?
Yeah,
because you know it's this thing about the long, you know, the 55 degrees over 3 hours and all this sort of stuff. I just think it's very interesting in terms of, you know.
Well, put it this way. I was talking to one of my environmental health colleagues, and the US Department of Agriculture, who looks after food safety across in the States, recommend that pink pork's all right if you cook it to 63 or whatever the Fahrenheit equivalent is over there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I asked a local environmental health officer, well, not local to Harrogate, but a colleague of mine, I said, if someone was cooking pork at 63, what would you do? She said, I'd prosecute them. So okay. That's the difference in between.
That sounds pretty black and white from where I'm standing.
Yeah. So I'm going to include all this
Okay.
information. So anyway, it's good night from you, Hugh. So I'll leave you.
Good night. Have a merry and safe Christmas to everyone, and I'll be in touch before Christmas, Steve.
Yeah. Okay then. So it's good night from you, and it's good night from me.
Good
Okay.
night. Good
Take
night.
care.
Bye. All done?
No, wait a minute. I'll just stop it there. It's